Good morning. So, in today's lecture, I am going to give you a quick introduction to Ernest Hemingway, one of the greatest novelists of all time, one of the greatest American novelists of all time. He is also, or he was also, a Nobel Prize winner. He lived between 1899 and 1961. The key concepts here that you should know in relation to Ernest Hemingway are iceberg theory or a style of writing, the phenomenon of the lost generation, wars, and Americans as expatriates. Hemingway was born on July 21st in 1899. He grew up in a well-known, respected and highly educated family in the conservative side of Illinois in America. His father was a physician. His name was Clarence Edmonds Hemingway, and his mother Grace Hall Hemingway was a music teacher who also sang in the local church choir. He had 4 sisters and 1 brother, and one of the most publicized aspects of his life has been that he was married 4 times. He was an eminent novelist and a larger than life kind of a personality. An early introduction to both music and sports had a strong influence on his writings. His first attempt at writing began in Oak Park High School, where he wrote mostly on sports. His career here as a journalist helped him learn and develop his unique writing style. In May 1918, he joined the Italian army as a Red Cross volunteer and was enlisted as an honorary lieutenant. On July 8, 1918, he was injured on the Austro-Italian front and was decorated for heroism. Later, he was wounded by a mortar shell and was hospitalized in Milan for many weeks, where he fell in love with a person called Agnes von Koroski. It was a failed love affair which badly affected him, and after the war in the 1920s, his career as a journalist flourished. So, a man of myriad experiences, varied experiences, and all his colorful experiences influenced his writings. In 1922, along with his first wife, Elizabeth Headley, and this was upon the great Sherwood Anderson's suggestion, that he decided to visit many European countries, particularly to France, to explore some possibilities for publication. All his experiences, early experiences, are beautifully narrated in A Movable Feast. He had an introductory letter to Gertrude Stein, Alice B. Toklas, James Joyce and Ezra Pound. All these are modernist writers, and then he went to Europe, particularly to Paris. He was in contact with these, or he was a part of the group of these writers, Stein and Toklas and Joyce and Ezra Pound. He had extremely high regards for Ezra Pound. In his various expeditions to Africa, Europe and Cuba, and through these expeditions, he gained, or he gathered experiences which added rich assets to his literary career, rich layers to his literary career. He went to 5 wars and was wounded badly as an 18-year-old volunteer ambulance driver in the First World War, and he was among the first Americans to enter Paris during the Allied invasion of Europe in the First World War. He also covered, and he was a reporter, so we have to remember, he covered the Greek army's retreat from Constantinople. So, you have to see the kinds of experience he had, the kinds of people he must have come across, the kinds of people he moved among. So, in 1922, he covered the Greek army's retreat from Constantinople and he covered it for the Toronto Star. And he also covered the Spanish Civil War, which took place between 1936 and 1939 for an organization called the North American Newspaper Alliance. And then he also covered the China War with Japan in 1941 for PM magazine. Post-war events in Europe helped him in his serious political education, and he wrote about anarchists, anti-Semitism, fascism, power politics, disarmament, German inflation, and also most interestingly Paris nightlife. He also wrote extensively about Spanish bullfights and German trout fishing, all this for Toronto's Star Weekly. His deep involvement, particularly in the Spanish Civil War in 1936, is noteworthy. He raised $40,000 for ambulances and medical supplies. Indeed, he sympathized with the Loyalists, and his 4 trips to Spain between 1937 and 1939 resulted in The Spanish Earth, which was a film, and The Fifth Column, a play which was published in 1938, and most importantly in his immortal novel For Whom the Bell Tolls in 1940. He survived 4 automobile accidents and 2 airplane crashes in Uganda on consecutive days in 1954, producing which these accidents even led to his obituaries in world's newspapers, premature obituaries of course, but nevertheless. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1954 and Pulitzer for The Great, The Old Man and the Sea. By 1959 and 60, Hemingway suffered a number of health problems, both physical and mental. By this time, Fidel Castro's revolution had driven Hemingway from Cuba. He then moved to Idaho, back in America. In July 1961, on 2nd July rather, he shot himself through a double-barreled shotgun. His major works are Up in Michigan, Out of Season, and My Old Man. All these are early short stories. And in 1923, his publication, 3 Stories and 10 Poems, gave him some confidence to think beyond writing for the newspapers. And then he went on to publish In Our Time, Men Without Women, and Winner Take Nothing, which are today collected in the first 49 stories. They are collectively called the first 49 stories. In Men Without Women, 1927, it's a group of 14 stories including 50 Grand, The Undefeated, and Today is Friday. Stories are presented in a world full of male gamblers, killers, fighters and drinkers. The themes are again prize fighting, bullfighting, divorce, doomed love affairs and death. All these themes which you find recurring over and again in Hemingway's works. His style received much critical acclaim, but was also criticized for his conformity to the belief that he was interested in violence and brutality. When you read The Sun Also Rises, that is our primary text for this course, you are going to find these themes. Although in The Sun Also Rises, it is not that strongly foregrounded, but nevertheless it is prevalent. And then you will find in the later writings how much he was fascinated by the themes of violence and bloodshed and also death. Let us talk about how Hemingway started publishing. So, until 1926, most of his works were published by Liveright Publications. At this time, Hemingway wrote The Torrents of Spring, a parody in which he ridiculed Sherwood Anderson's Dark Laughter, which Liveright refused to publish since it was directed against someone well known, a famous contemporary author. The work did not add to his reputation as an author, but helped him move on to the next publisher, the Scribners. Scribners, along with the publication of The Torrents of Spring, won the rights for his next novel, The Sun Also Rises. The Sun Also Rises was published in 1926. We are soon going to do the novel. It was originally titled Fiesta, and we are going to discuss various issues or themes in The Sun Also Rises when we start doing the novel. So, I suggest that all of you start reading the novel. See, one of the ideas behind floating this course is that I encourage you, we all here encourage you to read a lot. Reading will give you ideas, reading will help you in exploring works of literature with a greater critical insight. So, idea is to make you read. We are going to do plenty of texts. So, please have an e-copy at least with you and keep reading as I teach the novel. You will find some of the students who are taking the class, they come with copies of their own. So, perhaps I may occasionally imply a page number. So, let that not deter you. You read according to your own pace and whatever is your edition of the book. I will keep repeating the chapter title and the page number several times, and I will also tell you which point exactly I am on. So, please be attentive to that. So, The Sun Also Rises is a modernist novel. It is about a group of British and American expatriates living in Paris during the early part of the 20th century. The story is of a writer, Jake Barnes, who is emasculated by war, and he loves a beautiful young woman, Brett Ashley, who is and it is again a doomed, a failed love story. The characters in the novel are portrayed with a stroke of realism representing the people in Hemingway's circle. These are all wastelanders, and they have a loveless, unconventional and morally shocking life. And all these themes had a great appeal to the war-wearied generation of the 1920s, better known as or popularly known as the lost generation. Now, this term appeared in the epigraph for The Sun Also Rises. Okay. It is credited to Gertrude Stein, who used it to address the expatriates like Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Dos Passos, Cummings, Hart Crane and McLeish, and all these I am going to talk about the origin of this in of this phrase, the lost generation, when we do the novel. Now, they were a community, all these writers, the modernists, the expats, were a community of hard drinking, fast living, disillusioned young people in self-exile, young writers in self-exile in the post-war Paris. Paris served as home to their literary activities. Hemingway was influenced, as I have already told you, by these writers and artists of Montparnasse quarter, where he met all these writers in, along with great artists such as Picasso and Juan Gris. Now, this post-war generation who was out of America experienced the war and a sense of lost freedom. The period saw heavy industrialization, cultural change and violence. The values they inherited were no more relevant in the post-war period. They now lived in an increasingly provisional, emotionally barren and materialistic world. The major themes highlighted in their works included experiences of the First World War, decadence and frivolous lifestyle of the wealthy and the death of the American dream. The novel explores over a range of themes which includes death, renewal, women and love, masculinity and gender, class and race, and of course, cosmopolitanism. Hemingway makes use of the concept of the unreliable narrator. The narration is objective, almost documentary and unsentimental, just like that of its hero journalists. Let me also introduce you to Hemingway's famous iceberg theory, or the iceberg theory. The dignity That is what he calls the dignity of movement of an iceberg is due to only 1/8 of being above water. An iceberg is always only 1/8 above water, and this was the style that he intended to follow. And the iceberg principle meant that the writer should write only 1/8 of what is there and what lies beneath, and the reader, it is up to the reader, the critics, to interpret in the way they want to. So, what he is trying to say is the supporting structure and the symbolism operate out of sight in a work of literary text, okay, and it is out of sight with the facts floating with or about water or above water. Hemingway's iceberg theory is also referred to as a theory of omission. In continuation with his idea of the iceberg theory, he used short and simple declarative sentences, thus developing a style in which meanings were established through dialogues, actions and silences without stating anything explicitly. He refrained from using every conceivable device like symbolism, allegory, imagery and figures of speech. So, again talking about the iceberg theory, this economical and understated style was shaped in reaction to the First World War, expressing a lost faith in the central institutions of the West, and style of writing in the West, he did not want to follow that. Okay, so, challenging the notion of centrality. Now, Hemingway's style stands against the elaborated style of the 19th century writers. This is what lies behind the idea or the principle of the iceberg theory. Coming to his one of the greatest novels, A Farewell to Arms, that followed The Sun Also Rises. So, Farewell to Arms was published in 1929, A Farewell to Arms, that is the exact title, and the title was borrowed from George Peele's poem A Farewell to Arms, and symbolic of Hemingway's farewell to a period and attitudes, and also perhaps to a method. It is the story of an American ambulance driver and a British nurse brought together at the time of the First World War. The hero is Frederick Henry and he is wounded, and the heroine, the nurse, is Catherine Berkeley. Now, their unwedded pregnancy is is one of the major themes or major episodes of the novel, and also war, an episode in Italy at Caporetto, and then also the lovers, how they try to escape the entire scenario, and then Catherine's death in childbirth. So, no attempt to lead a happily ever after is fulfilled. So, again we are talking about the doomed love, the theme of doomed love in Hemingway's works. So, it went on to become one of the foremost American war novel. It was soon followed in 1937 by To Have and Have Not. Hemingway had already published two heroes about the central character, Harry Morgan. He is a smuggler and he was later expanded and transformed into the novel as a major character. He is our hero. He smuggles liquor and men from Cuba into the US in order to feed his wife and children. While at work, he loses one arm and is later gut shot rather, while killing 3 Cuban bank robbers. The title of the novel is ironic. It suggests that the real mark of a man's wealth is not money alone. The narrative again is polyphonic, and we have already been talking about what is polyphonic. It is multivocal, several points of view are seen in the novel. One of his greatest novels, according to many, is For Whom the Bell Tolls, which was published in 1940. Now, this novel, as is generally believed, is not about Spanish politics as about the fate of the Republic and its people caught up in the Civil War. The title is taken from a poem by John Donne, one of the metaphysical poets from England. It speaks of the inevitability of the human predicament from which no one can escape. And here I would like you to look at the origin of the title. Please look at the slide here. Donne's No Man is an Island. Please take a look, it may help some of you who take competitive exams, and this is the origin of the title. No man is an island entire of itself, each is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor on thine own or of thine friends were. Each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore send not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Okay. So, the story of For Whom the Bell Tolls is about it's Robert Jordan's story. He is the hero, the semi-autobiographical hero who succeeds in his mission of blowing up a bridge to check the advancements of fascists. He is fatally wounded and lies there waiting for his inevitable death. The novel is popular or was popular in its day for its narrative style, characterization. It has very strong characterizations. And you have also, you got to read this novel for the way women are represented. His next immortal novel is Across the River and Into the Tree, 1950. The novel opened to very poor sales and critical reception, but later the sales improved. It is about the hero Richard Cantwell, a retired colonel who goes to Venice for duck shooting, where he falls in love with a 19-year-old Italian countess called Renetta. The novel is partially based on an episode of his life in Italy, where he fell in love with the 19-year-old Adriana Ivanovich. The pièce de résistance of his career, The Old Man and the Sea, was published in 1952, which is based on his personal fishing experiences in Cuba. This is a very simple tale. It's a novella, it's a slim novel. It's a story of an old fisherman's losing battle with sharks over the carcass of his giant marlin. It's a fish. The old man here represents a Shakespearean hero, and a tragic hero, a larger than life hero, who is a simple man as opposed to the Aristotelian tragic hero. So, he is a larger than life hero in the way we come across his will, the indomitable will. By that I do not mean he is an aristocrat with just one tragic flaw, the way you have Aristotelian heroes. He is a hero of a different stature. The work was obviously influenced by the avant-garde movement, and its experimental style is quite explicit in its modern narration. It is quite rich in symbolism, and it is not only the story of a fisherman struggling against sharks, but also of the struggle of the whole of humanity against cruel forces of the world, of an artist against his critics, and of Hemingway himself against his unsympathetic critics and reviewers. The novel went on to win the Pulitzer Prize in 1952. His other works include short stories based on his African safari. Then he also wrote The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber and The Snows of Kilimanjaro. These are all novels of the landscape, and we have to understand that the vividness of his landscapes and sharpness of his narrative and constant building upon suspense, all these are, these are the experiments that he frequently conducted, and these works are the culmination of these attempts. He successfully brought the landscape to come alive before the eyes of the reader and thus communicates a sense of the place. He has also written a famous non-fiction, Death in the Afternoon, which is mainly concerned with the art of bullfighting, and then The Highlands of Africa, which discarded in favor of Green Hills of Africa, is his second work of non-fiction based on his exciting adventures in Africa. Hemingway's later works include, between 1957 and 1960, he worked on a series of sketches of his friends concerning the years from 1921 to 1926 in Paris, and this was posthumously published in A Movable Feast in 1964. Also among his posthumous publications is Islands in the Stream, which was a 1970 work, which was originally in the form of 3 loosely connected narratives tentatively called the Sea When Young, the Sea When Absent, and the Sea When Being. So, quite an existentialist kind of a writer, which he was. And existentialist themes are quite frequent in his works, and the last of the 3 was published, that is The Sea When Being, as The Old Man and the Sea. So, I hope you understand all these various strands and threads that run through his works. You should also know how rich his works are in irony and symbolism. You are students of literature, and if not, then you should be interested in irony and symbolism in order to appreciate literature better. Now, Hemingway used natural symbols such as the mountain and the plain and the dark and the light to express implicit meanings in his short stories and novels. He also used Greek myths as symbols. However, his symbolism is present only in the narrative and not in the story. He does not violate the principle of realism and gives only subtle hints, suggestions and implications of symbolism in the narrative. Also remember how he uses, or note how he uses, the technique of objective epitome, in which the subjective condition of a character are conveyed not through the descriptive method, but by describing a few objective details which shapes the conditions and feelings of a character. Now, irony was particularly employed in the titles of Hemingway's works. By emphasizing disparity and understatement, it helped in achieving maximum artistic effect. We have to understand that his legacy lies in his contribution to American literature for the way he wrote his novels, the narrative style, the Iceberg style of writing, his economical style of writing. And after his death, his 4th wife, Mary, she established Hemingway Foundation in 1965, and in 1980, a group of Hemingway scholars formed Hemingway Society to encourage scholarship on Hemingway. The recent tragic attack in Paris in 2015 boosted the sales, ironically, of A Movable Feast in order to honor the victims of the attack. Please look at the references here on Hemingway. Thank you very much, and please be prepared with The Sun Also Rises.